Well, my friends, an eighth principle. An eighth principle, if we adopt this, we're going to have to change all our posters. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. Isn't that lovely? But why do we need it? I mean, we already have the first principle that says all lives matter, right? All lives matter. Does that make you uncomfortable? Are you squirming? I hope so. And if you're not, maybe that's why we need this one. I mean, all lives do matter, but sometimes we use that as a way to center the dominant culture. Where did this come from anyway? Well, let me tell you. Paula Cole Jones, maybe you know her. Yeah. Paula Cole Jones, who has been director of racial and social justice for a long time, just in the Joseph Priestley district, and now and then in the Central East region for a long time. She developed the idea of the existence of two different paradigms in UU circles, the UU 7 principles and beloved community. And after working with congregations on these issues for over 15 years, she realized that a person can believe they are being a good UU and following the 7 principles without thinking about or dealing with racism and other oppressions at the systemic level. And part of that is because most UU congregations are primarily and sometimes exclusively of European ancestry, or of European American origin. And we center European culture and whiteness. And so she and a bunch of other people put together this this initial draft. She and Bruce Pollock Johnson put it together in 2013, and they worked with a group of anti-racist activists in the JPD to refine it. And that's how it started to come together. And the 8th principle came from a feeling that we need something to renew our commitment to this work and to hold ourselves accountable and to fulfill the potential of our existing principles. And you can find all of this. My notes come today. These notes come from the Blue website, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. And you can find out more information there. And for those of us who identify as white, it can be very easy to put things out of our mind, to not see the oppressions that people of color have to deal with all the time, and to not see the oppressions and to not see our own privilege that sometimes we are perpetrating on other people. And who here likes to be uncomfortable? Nobody? Nobody? Okay. You know, we don't like to be uncomfortable. I don't blame you. I don't like to be uncomfortable. And having to deal with oppressions that we ourselves may be perpetrating, well, that does make us uncomfortable. Well, my friends, I have to tell you that I am part of the problem. Now, I grew up when I was very little on the northern tip of Manhattan in a very diverse community. A very diverse community. I went to school with black children, with Puerto Rican children, with Dominican children, with white children. I was Jewish, and I knew kids who were Jewish and who were Catholic and who were Protestant, and all these kids. And this work, I have a lot to learn. This work is difficult for me. And I have faced oppression. I have been called filthy Jew walking down the streets of New York, and I got attacked after school when we moved to the suburbs for being Jewish. And I have work to do. I did not grow up in an all-white suburb in middle America, and I have work to do. So maybe a lot of us have work to do, yeah? Maybe a lot of us have work to do. By the time I was 6 years old, growing up in that very mixed area of New York City, I knew from watching TV that the standard of beauty was white. Because all the models in the magazines and in the commercials were white. I mean, there was Julia and there was Lieutenant Uhuru, but everybody else on TV was white. So much so that I told Edwina, one of my mother's favorite students and who babysat for me and who was not white, Edwina was African American. I remember telling her when I was no older than 6, maybe 4 or 5 or 6. You're so beautiful, even though your skin isn't this color. Yeah, you're gasping and you should. What a horrible thing to say. Now, she was very gracious about it because she heard this coming out of a small child, and I had no way to articulate it other than that. That was me working that out. But what a horrible thing to hear for her. I wasn't receiving that message from my parents. I was receiving it from the world, and it was received. So I have work to do. I have work to do. How am I going to do it? How am I going to address my privilege within Unitarian Universalism and walking through the world? You know, I went through my whole life in this country never being stopped for walking while white or driving while white. And so it was easy for me for a very long time to say, oh, come on, if the police stop people, they must have a reason. My eyes had to be open. Now, I'll tell you that I've heard arguments from white people as to why we shouldn't be including this 8th principle in Unitarian Universalism, mostly having to do with, well, the grammar doesn't fit the other principles. We have the 1st principle and the 7th principle, and they cover this already. 7 is such an elegant number, we don't need 8. So I want to read to you from an OSS manual. Now, I know some of you are familiar with the NSA. I know that doesn't exist, but I know some of you are familiar with it. Do you know what the OSS is? It's the precursor to the CIA. So this is from a 1944 OSS manual, Simple Sabotage Field Manual. This is on how to sabotage organizations, and this is on organizations and conferences. Insist on doing everything through channels. Never permit shortcuts to be taken in order to expedite decisions. Make speeches. Talk as frequently as possible and at great length. Illustrate your points by long anecdotes and accounts of personal experiences. When possible, refer all matters to committees for further study and consideration. Attempt to make the committee as large as possible, never less than 5. Bring up irrelevant issues as frequently as possible. Haggle over precise wordings of communications, minutes, resolutions. Refer back to matters decided upon at the last meeting and attempt to reopen the question of the advisability of that decision. Advocate caution. Be reasonable and urge your fellow conferees to be reasonable and avoid haste, which might result in embarrassments or difficulties later on. Have any of you ever been to General Assembly? Does this sound familiar at all to those of you who have been to General Assembly? Do we ever do this in our churches? Do we get caught up in the precise wording of things? Well, you know, it's a nice idea, but you know, that wording, it just doesn't fit. When we're uncomfortable with a thing, we look for other things to nitpick at, don't we? We look for ways around. You know, I like the idea, but it just doesn't fit. I like the idea, but 7 is good and 8 is too many. I like the idea, but... So I'm going to urge you to sit with your discomfort. And I'm telling you that I have had to sit with my discomfort, and I'm telling you that I have been that person. I have been that person who has been offended by stupid things that I did not need to be offended by. That I have been that person in church who's brought up silly tangents and ridiculous things in order to not deal with the real issue in front of me. And I'm going to ask you to deal with the real issues in front of us and to sit with the discomfort. And I will sit with the discomfort with you. Because while we haggle about the precision of language, and while we debate about whether we should really only have 7 principles or not, and while we urge caution and send things back, the oppression and the systemic racism goes on. Would you be shocked if I told you that there have been Unitarian Universalist churches that put on minstrel shows for fundraisers? Some of you would be shocked, some of you would not be. What if I told you that some of those minstrel shows continued into the 1950s? So you know that I live in Virginia. Where our governor, bless his heart. That's not a New York thing, but I've been living in Virginia for 30 years, so bless his heart. Where our governor is insisting that the picture in his medical school yearbook, not high school yearbook, not even college yearbook, his grown man medical school yearbook, the picture of a man in blackface and another man in a Klan outfit. Well, that's not him. But oh yeah, he wore blackface other times. Okay. And our Attorney General has said, well, just so you know, when I was a teenager, and he fessed up to this, I too wore blackface, he said. And I know it was wrong and I shouldn't have done it. He knows that now. And this is what we're talking about institutional racism. It's not about those two individuals having prejudicial views. It's about a whole system, a whole environment in which this was acceptable, in which nobody said, hey, this is not cool. This is not acceptable. A whole system in which that was acceptable. And in our own past, in UU churches, where we've had congregations that put on minstrel shows with blackface to raise money. And nobody stopped to say, what are we doing? But before I get too much on my high horse, I want to tell you that as a child, I didn't think twice about dressing up as cowboys and Indians, right? Whom do we other? Whom do we other? It's still perfectly acceptable in most places to dress up like a gypsy, which is not a very nice name for Roma people. It's not the name that Roma people would like to be called. When we accept it for one group of people, it's not a very far leap to start othering other groups of people. I want to try something with you. I'd like you to think of a person, any person. This person is an engineer, a mechanical engineer who works on airplanes and has had a long and honorable career. Do you have a picture of this person in your head? Now, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but I'm going to bet that most of you are picturing a white person. That's okay if you are. Most of you are white people. But I want to tell you that the default human in the world is not a white person. It's not a white man. The default human is not a man. The default human is not white. And until we can move ourselves past thinking that the default person is a white man, we need to continue to check ourselves. There's nothing wrong with having an image in your head of somebody who is like you. There's nothing wrong with that. But the difficulty comes when we are continually surprised when it's someone else. I like to watch old game shows, like 50s and 60s game shows. And if you ever watch What's My Line, they're constantly fooling the panel by bringing on a woman in a man's job, or a Japanese person who makes pizza, or who is a jazz pianist and doesn't cook Japanese food. Or And until we can move past those stereotypes, we need to do this work. And so I'm asking you to consider very seriously this 8th principle. And why do we want to do this work in church? Why do we want to covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions? And how does that have anything to do with spiritual wholeness? Well, my friends, how spiritually whole can we be? How spiritually whole can we be when we go around thinking that everyone who isn't like me is less than me? Anybody know the musical Oklahoma? Ann Eller is one of my favorite characters in that, and she sings a song, "The cowboy and the rancher should be friends." And there's a line in there, "I don't say I'm no better than anybody else, but I'll be danged if I ain't just as good." If we are to be spiritually whole, we must have everybody along for the ride. So this is a bit of a selfish principle, this one. Because how can we be one world community? How can we build this beloved community? How can we be spiritually whole individually if we are not spiritually whole as a community? I'm not there yet, friends. I have work to do. Do you have work to do? Who has work to do? Do you have work to do? Say, I can't hear you. Do you have work to do? Yes. Do you have work to do? Yes. Will we do it together? Yes. Will we do it together? Yes. Will we do it together? Yes. Let's do it together. All right. We can do this together. We can build the beloved community together. We need not worry about semicolons and bullet points and grammar. That'll get fixed. Let us adopt this principle. Let us take it to heart. Let us truly see the face of the holy in each other. Namaste.